Today, we are getting into the last part of the model as well as the focus for the entire model. So, we started with the individual parts, understanding that we have to know what our values are and live to those values, and saw how that translates into the group part of it and how that can be challenging, knowing that you have your own set of values and now you have to start collaborating with and having that controversy with civility with other group members and how that might affect your values and how to live those values and what the group values are going to be. And then you take it one step further because, as I've said previously, success as a leader doesn't have to be an either or situation where it's either success as an organization or contributing to the community. It's a both and. You can be successful in your organization or your business while also still being a part, very much a part of that community and building up that community. And that's what citizenship is all about. So let's get into that. So, citizenship is active engagement of the individual as well as the leadership group in an effort to serve the community as well as the citizen's mind. So, a set of values and beliefs that connects an individual in a responsible manner to others. And that's what the focus is. There are so many times where an organization or a business will get into a community, even with the best of intentions, and not really focus on what kind of impact they're making or how they can better that community. They might see some positives and maybe they make some efforts, but this model shows the importance of being a citizen of that community. What is that community? What are we talking about? So it refers to people associated with one another through shared interests, perspectives, attitudes, or goals. But in addition to this affiliation, community implies a shared responsibility toward achieving something bigger than the individual. And that's key because oftentimes leaders can get caught up in just thinking about themselves, and we're trying to do more than that. We are trying to show that, again, you can be successful, you can be good at what you do, and you can still provide a benefit and grow with your community and be a part of your community. And that's what we're looking for. So, how can you be an engaged citizen, or what does it mean to be engaged in citizenship? So, as a leader, as a group, they talked about a leadership group. What are some things to think about? One is social capital. So, what power and influence do you have? A good example of this might be like your social media reach and what you can do using that reach to bring awareness to issues within the community. Being aware of the community's history. Again, there are many times where a business or organization will come in, again, with the best of intentions and think they're doing something positive, not realizing the history of that community and how what they're doing might actually be a detriment and not a benefit. Empowerment. There are often times where because you don't have all the perspectives in a room when you're trying to make these decisions for a community because you haven't consulted that community, that there are some people who have not been considered in your plans. And I'll give you a specific example, right? I remember years ago in El Paso, those rent-a-scooters were everywhere. And that's for the most part, that company saw a need that we should maybe move away from, cars being everywhere. And this is a really good way for folks to get around and it's affordable and yada, yada, yada. And that was for them, a net positive. But there's certain segments of the population that this could be a problem because for a lot of folks, when they were done with those scooters, they were done and they would just leave them somewhere, oftentimes in the middle of the sidewalk. So folks who had some sort of disability that would require, a wheelchair, or even folks that say you broke your leg and you're on one of those little like scooters that you have to kind of drag along on wheels, all of a sudden this became a hindrance to you. But that's not something that you were thinking of, and that's not something that some of these businesses were thinking of when they came across this idea. So that's just a small example of how we can still empower people within the community through in our decision making. Social perspective taking. This idea of self-awareness, this is extending that to the community and thinking about how they would think about things, feel about things when we're trying to make these decisions. And lastly is coalition building, because it's not just you and your organization and the community. The best way of finding that progress and succeeding and building, great relationships is by building great relationships with other organizations and other businesses. So we're all working together for the same common goal. So, how does citizenship work with the other C's? So, citizenship draws on the interconnectedness of the individual and group and societal C's. Experiences with citizenship often challenge people to make choices that require them to clarify their commitments, consider their values through consciousness of self, and examine where their choices are congruent with their beliefs. So, We have our values, we reevaluate those at the group level, and then we reevaluate those again when we start working as a citizen in the community. And all of this, the whole model is about change and how we can make change happen. And of course, we're trying to make it a positive change. For a lot of folks, change can be difficult. For many leaders, their idea is that we reach a point of stability and we don't have to worry about change. But that's not realistic when we're thinking about modern leadership because it's complex, it's dynamic. There are people involved. Anytime that you have people involved, there's going to be change and we're going to have to adapt to that change. So if change is constant, what can we do? Because, like it says here, we're either growing or decaying. And if you take that mentality, then even more so, it's like, how can we work with other people to make sure that we're constantly growing, constantly getting better? And maybe that only the parts that aren't working, maybe those are the parts that can decay and we can focus on that growth. So what does that look like? How can we make a change in the way that we think about change? So, taking a systems approach to change can be helpful. So, it results in multiple part solutions. When you're working with other people, it means you might have to go a little bit slower and have multiple parts and multiple stages for that change. It reveals the power of networks and relationships. Again, going back to that idea of coalition building and having people working together to make sure that this change isn't just temporary, but it's long lasting. This system thinking reveals how we unintentionally contribute to the problem. Again, going back to that example where you are not realizing that you are solving one problem, but also might be creating another for people in your community. And it also reveals which changes yield the most impact. Because for a lot of leaders, they think that their idea is the best. And your idea still might be good, but until you start working with other people and working with other community members, you might realize that this good idea could be great when other people get involved and start building on that idea, and that could have a greater impact. And that's more important, right? It is better to have a greater impact than to be right about, okay, well, this idea was good. Okay, but it wasn't the best that we could do. And that's what we're hoping for is the greatest amount of impact. So this idea, the traditional view of change, which I just talked about, is that especially when you think about these businesses that maybe let someone go or they lost a leader and they bring someone brand new in, the idea is that you unfreeze that status quo, you make the change or changes that you want to make, and then you refreeze it again for stability. But again, that's a little short-sighted and not realistic when it comes to dealing with people. You need to be flexible. Understand that you might have even when you do all of this and you have this really great plan in motion, things might change and shift, and you need to be flexible and be willing to adapt to that. So organic change can be influenced but not controlled. And that can be really difficult for some leaders because for a lot of folks, leadership in their mind is synonymous with power and control. And so you have to take a little bit of a mind shift on that. So once growth has gained momentum, it is not possible to force change or control the change process. You can influence it. You can try to bring those ideas about. But once it gets that momentum, it's more about working with other people for the greater good. And lastly, when we're thinking about change, there's this idea between a technical and an adaptive change. So technical is resolved by existing strategies. And for a lot of leaders, it's like, okay, we've seen this problem before and we know how to fix it. The problem is, again, when you start going from working within just the organization to then working with the community, there's a lot of variables involved and things that we can't control. And so we're not sure what's going to work. And sometimes that might mean an adaptive change, which requires an adjustment in mindset and these different mental models that we have. So just even this picture, right? For some folks, they might see this and see three triangles, and it just takes a small shift to then see a circle inside of a large triangle. And there's little ways that we can do that. I know in my work as an executive coach, I've worked with some leaders who their big thing is like I work, I have my family, but I'm working on this personal project, and I'm really just trying to find 2 hours a week that I can work on this project, and it just seems impossible. And really, they're thinking of I need to find a day where I can do 2 hours. And for them, it's like, well, that just means I got to do it on a Saturday or Sunday. But that might not be realistic when you think about all the family stuff and things just, we're just busy. And so one weekend goes by and then you weren't able to find those 2 hours. And then another one, and before you know it, it's been a couple months and you still haven't found those 2 hours and you get frustrated. But if you're really just looking for 2 hours, why can't that just be 30 minutes here and there throughout the week until you hit those 2 hours? It's still 2 hours, but it's just shifting it just a little bit and thinking, okay, well, I'm going to get those 2 hours done this week. It's just going to be in spurts. And maybe that 30 minutes that you allot for yourself turns into 45 or an hour, but at the very least, you knocked out those 30 minutes. And over the course of a week, you hit those 2 hours. It's a weird example, but it shows how it can just might take a little bit of a mind shift to have this kind of adaptive change. So that's the last part of the model. The last couple weeks that we have, we're going to be examining the model and kind of wrapping things up.